Roundtable discussion on the chronic effects of weighted baseballs on throwing velocity, spin rate, and arm stress. I'm Jared Volkmer, Human Performance, and today I'm here to guide you through this 10-week training study. So, referring to our last discussion, we concluded that throwing weighted baseballs work both acutely and chronically on throwing velocity, right? However, to date, no other study has looked at the effects of spin rate and arm stress over time. So now you're probably thinking, why are these two variables so important? Well, spin rate, until recently, has actually been correlated with throwing velocity, and this is just another variable that we can use to measure force output on a pitch. And arm stress is actually very critical to analyze over time because the throwing motion is actually the single fastest motion in all of sport, okay? So now, how are all these variables related to one another? So the null hypothesis is that throwing weighted baseballs will have no effect on throwing velocity, spin rate, and arm stress. However, the alternative is that the weighted baseballs will increase both throwing velocity and spin rate. However, the underweighted baseball will create the most amount of arm stress over time. Okay, so now, how am I going to measure these variables? So for throwing velocity, I'm going to be using the electromagnetic radar gun that has been validated from Dereni 1990. Spin rate, I'm going to use a new product called the RevFire baseball. It's actually pretty cool. There's an accelerometer within this baseball that'll give me the spin rate output on the pitch. And then for arm stress, I'm going to use the RPE and PRS scales. So for those of you who don't know what these two measurements are, RPE stands for rating of perceived exertion, and PRS stands for perceived recovery status, or perceived soreness rate. So for the familiarization session in this study, I'm going to take all of my subjects through a weighted ball program with the RevFire baseball and the weighted baseball, just because it's probably going to feel differently than the standard 5-ounce baseball. So that's why I want to familiarize everybody to those two things. So then once I get everybody familiarized, for the pre-measures, I'm going to take their throwing velocity and spin rate. And then for the end of the study, I'm going to split velocity groups into a high velocity and low velocity group. And later on, I'm going to discuss as to why I'm doing this. So we got all the pre-measures and everything. And then again, it's a 10-week training study, 3 times a week. Each player will be randomized into their respective weighted ball group, and they're going to throw 50 throws per session with their assigned weighted baseball. So that totals up to 150 throws per week. Volume is the same in all groups, but the intensity is going to vary. So I have the 4-ounce, standard 5-ounce, 11-ounce, and 8-ounce weighted baseballs. So at the end of the study, I'm going to take throwing velocity and spin rate again. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that before each session, that's when I'm going to take the individual's PRS score, and 5 minutes after their session, I'm going to take their RPE score. So at the end of the study, hopefully the data analyzation will support my alternative hypothesis. And the reason why I'm splitting the high and low velocity groups is so I can answer 2 questions. 1, should high velocity throwers only use the overweighted baseball? And 2, should the developing thrower use the entire spectrum of weighted ball training to increase throwing velocity and spin rate? So that concludes this presentation. Now I'm going to open the floor for any questions or comments. Chris?
Would using a different weighted baseball for the development group hinder their development over time?
Can you word that differently?
So will using an overweight baseball change their technique in a developing player over time?
So for my inclusion criteria, I want to select high school baseball players that have some sort of travel experience, because yeah, I don't want to take a young baseball player who already doesn't have the proper throwing mechanics to pick up a weighted baseball, because then that's going to increase their injury risk of injury. Good question, Matt. Yes.
You said that the throwing movement was the fastest movement in any sport.
The humerus internally rotates at 7,000 degrees per second.
There you go.
Yes.
Let's just say
sample size?
It's a good question, and I was kind of juggling around this a little bit. For high school baseball, there's usually 20 per roster, but I would try and shoot somewhere between 24 and 36. So I may have to go around the community to recruit some subjects. Yes.
Sorry. Would you specifically want to work with a single position player? Because sometimes different, like if they're on third base compared to a pitcher, compared to a catcher, compared to outfield, they all have a different type of throw, I guess. In a way.
So again, throwing velocity is something that's important for every single position, and most of the time when you're in high school and you're a high level player, for example, you're also a pitcher. So the population I wanted to look at specifically was pitching, and I wanted to standardize that training session as well. So they're not going to go any further than 60 feet and 6 inches, because that's the distance it is from the pitching mound to home plate. But again, yes, the throws are going to be different for each position, and throwing velocity is very important for each of those. But I should use pitchers only so that it increases the external validity of the study. Yes, that's a great question. Did I answer?
Yeah, I was asking if you were going to pretty much just pick one position and work with them.
Yeah, I'm still in the process of doing that. John?
Would you consider a follow-up study, maybe in softball, that would kind of find some sort of correlation between this exact result?
As in?
Softball pitchers.
Pitchers would be underhand.
Right.
So that would be very interesting, actually, to look at that. But the literature does say that the overhand throwing motion is more stressful to the arm rather than the underhand pitching motion. So I think that would still be pretty interesting, though. Wes?
As far as that rev fire baseball, does that come in the different weights as well? Or does it just come in the standard 5 ounce?
It is the standard size and weight. Yes.
You wouldn't exclude any sidearm throwers, would you?
I would exclude sidearm throwers, yes.
I know 10 weeks is a short period of time.
Yeah, most of the literature, because this is a new research area, most of the literature is looking between 8 to 10 weeks of training, so I kind of wanted to stay within that window.
And I agree with that. This is just kind of out there. When someone hits a growth spurt, do you think that's going to affect the results in any way in that time? Because you're working with high school age kids, very linky as is at some time at points.
That could absolutely have an effect on the results, yes. So take somebody who's a GLL, for example, so they're very lax in their joints. Putting them through a weighted ball program is something I would not recommend whatsoever. So I think I could include that in my inclusion criteria as well. I think that's very important. Yes?
About the radar gun, I know that it's a pretty good tool to use to measure speed. I know that police use it to measure speed of velocity of cars. But
do you know this from first-hand experience?
I actually do. My dad's a physics professor. He got a speeding technique using physics. But anyways, that's beside the point.
I have two.
The point is, wouldn't it be a little bit? I'll later. Wouldn't it be a little bit more, not necessarily easier, but more effective to use a high-speed camera from the side using a backdrop to measure the speed of the ball instead of having someone standing directly in the path of the ball measuring the speed straight on?
I think in addition of a 3D camera would be beneficial as well, because then you could track the kinematic differences over time. In Durrani's protocol, I'm pretty sure that the person with the radar gun, they stood behind the thrower as well as behind home plate, so then that's how they validated the radar gun, so you could do it from either behind or right behind home plate.
Anything else? Those were great questions, group. Pretty good. Going back to a couple of your peers' questions, exclusion criteria besides people that are screened as GLL positive or sidearm throwers? Any other exclusion criteria? Surgeries, injuries in the past year, or do you have a window that you want them to be healthy?
Somebody with a colorful medical history, I probably wouldn't want to include in the study.
So
because
how long post-injury or return to play do you want them before you want to include this training?
I mean, this is a young population as well, so if they were to have surgery early on in their high school career, it's also going to be hard for them to develop over the years. So
could even just be an injury and not surgery as well.
Yeah, that's true.
So do you want? You're not looking at this as a rehab process. You're looking at this as a developmental training process. So I would think you want to make sure that have been in terms of clean bill of health.
If they've been medically cleared from a doctor to further partake in
for
baseball activities.
I might be medically cleared, but I'm really not back to 100%. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a good question.
So, are you going to look at just shoulder, elbow injuries, or you want to look at anywhere? Any kind of injury, because the pitching motion itself is a full body motion. So I could have an ankle instability that would detract from my throwing
instability
velocity.
Or previous surgery?
Previous injury that led to instability.
I have another question actually.
Yes.
How does I don't know if you can really control, but wind up on throwing it, does wind up affect velocity?
As in?
A pitcher's wind up, his leg kick, or how are you testing them throwing it? Are they going to be on a mound like a pitcher, taking a step, or are they going to be crow hopping it?
I would exclude the crow hop. So you can either throw it off the mound in your pitching motion, or you're just having a regular catch with your partner, but no further than 60 feet.
Okay, yeah. I don't know.
But again, that's a good point, because there's actually a study out there that shows throwing flat ground is kinematically different than throwing off of a mound.
Yeah.
So that's a good point. I guess that's something I have to solidify.
Any other thoughts?
I was just saying, going off of that comment, you just as a suggestion, I wouldn't necessarily do their actual pitching motion. I would do more of the standard flat.
Yeah, standard flat ground.
Because
it'd be, I would get a bigger subject pull that way as well.
Someone can use more legs than their arm in a pitch than someone who just uses all arm or something like that. So you'd want to standardize the throw.
Yeah.
Too.
That's a good point.
Do you want them to throw on the field, or do you want them to throw
on the field?
In the lab. So,
on the field.
So you're still looking at sagittal plane rather than going through a transverse plane.
Well, I mean, it's both.
In terms of the ball flight pattern, not the arm pattern. The ball flight pattern.
For which variable?
For just your throwing pattern that you want to measure. Because not only are there different kinds of throws, fastball, slider, curveball, but you also may be on the field as an outfielder, maybe moving the ball through a transverse pattern versus an infielder that may only have it in a sagittal plane pattern.
So by pattern, do you mean the way the ball is moving?
Not necessarily, not its spin, but straight line versus straight line straight forward in front of me, from my release point versus
throwing across your body?
Cross body, because I'm trying to get it from this point in the field to this point in the field.
I guess
and my position in real time, in a real game, I'm not always in the
You're not in that
optimal position to make the throw. I make the throw off my back foot instead of my front foot in whatever body position I can, and so I whip my arm across my body to get it to where it needs to go.
So then, to answer your question, I would just be looking at
straight,
sagittal,
flat, plane. And then my last question was about your RPE scale. Which RPE scale are you going to use?
I do not know yet, but that is something I need to think about.
Okay, so my question here is, do you have an RPE scale in your arsenal that is for power activities? Because that's what this is.
Yes.
So you want to make sure you're not using something like the Borg scale, because
is that the 1 to 17?
It's the 6 to 20 scale.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Because the Borg scale was designed for aerobic activity.
Yeah.
Not for power.
Yeah.
So make sure you're using the appropriate RPE scale for this kind of an activity.
What's the scale when it's just 1 to 10?
That's still it's still an aerobic exertion scale. Is how it was validated originally. So it's just another RPE, but they were originally validated for aerobic exertion.
Okay.
So you may look for an RPE scale that was validated for a power activity, right? So for example, there are Omni scales, which are another perceived exertion scales. They have Omni scales for aerobic activity. They have cycling, running, flat, bicycling, going uphill. They have weightlifting.
Okay.
Perceived exertion scales. So that using an Omni scale comes in pictures. It's still a numerical scale, but every different kind of expression that you see, the individual.
I know what you're referring to. Yeah.
So there is an Omni scale for weightlifting.
Okay.
That may be closer to what you're really looking for because that's a power activity. Can be.
Yeah.
Then using the 6-to-20 or the 1-to-10 interval ratio scale that are really designed for aerobic exertion. Because on those scales, for example, on your 6-to-20 scale, once you get to 17 on that scale, that is considered to be above really your aerobic threshold, moving into your anaerobic threshold.
Okay.
So if they're all telling me that they're at 14s or 15s, and that's what you think they want, that shouldn't be correct.
Yeah.
In terms of how that scale should be used. So look and see what kind of RPE scale that you can find that's been validated for power. I can't give you the name of one offhand other than the Omni scales. But look at that. You want to make sure you're using a scale that's for that purpose.
Okay.
If not, then you got to go back and validate that scale somehow before you start. And that's just a pain. Why not use one that's validated?
Sure.
All right. Any other questions?
The Borg scale is the one that's 6 out of 20.
6-to-20.
It's like how you feel times 10. Is that how you get the number?
No.
No?
No. Your times 10 is coming into heart rate. You can turn the camera on, Chan. Thanks.
All right.
Okay.